Hey guys, welcome back to another video tutorial today. Today I have got the Grim Knight for you. And here it is, all completed. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, here we have our pattern. We're going to check the size on it. I'm using 5mm foam for the base here. I'm just going to trace out the overall exterior, mark the center, flip it over, and trace again. Get my X-Acto knife and do kind of a rough cut. Roll up the excess and cut off all the perimeters and make sure it's on the line. And here you're going to start cutting out your pattern so that way you can lay out the armored pieces in the correct way. And for the main chest piece, I'm using 10mm floor mat foam, and I'm actually going to be using the texture side up on this. So I'm going to cut that out and flip the pattern over. I'm going to be using straight cuts along the perimeter of this armor piece. Then I'm going to go through and bevel the edges with a Dremel, just slightly, just kind of rounds them over. You can see here it's already done. And here I'm marking the center of the armor piece, so that'll help with lining up the emblem later. And here is the smaller rib pieces that I'm cutting out. And I am cutting them out with a knife so that way I can lay the paper over the base and trace out where those side pieces go, so that way it is consistent and even on both sides. And I'm using a Jelly Roll tin, white pin for foam. It is actually a lot better than using a silver Sharpie, since silver Sharpies tend to dry out a lot. I get these Jelly Roll pins at Walmart or Hobby Lobby. And for the little rib pieces, I'm actually cutting them out in an inward angle cut. Then I will flip them over and glue them onto the base so that way there is an outward bevel on each one. For the emblem, I'm cutting the bottom line in an outward angle cut and all the rest of it in straight cuts. I like the outward angle cut on the bottom of the emblem, just kind of make it look a little more dynamic. And this is just 2mm foam that I'm using. And I'm just going to line up the middle and trace out the bottom part of it. And of course, sharp blade is always key. And for this line here on the bottom of the chest, I am using just a V-groove cut. You can also use a wood burner for it. And then you gotta make sure you heat your base piece, heat all your foam pieces, of course. But I like to heat front and back of it, just so that way it is completely sealed, and also gives me a bit of ability to curve it. And of course, heat all the foam armor pieces as well, front and back, so that way it's nice and sealed. And then you'll also apply the same curvature to the armor pieces so it matches the base and it's easier to glue on. You test the fit there, and then of course heat up the little rib pieces. These smaller pieces are a bit harder to heat up because it does tend to kind of move around. And heat both sides of that as well. Line them up, make sure I can get them set correctly. Heat up the emblem, the 2mm emblem. You want to heat it just slightly, since it is a 2mm foam. And then I use a DAP weldwood contact cement to glue down all of the armor pieces. You want to apply the contact cement to both surfaces to be glued. You'll wait for it to dry to attack, and then apply them together with pressure. I like to go around the perimeter of them and then fill in the center with it. Then here I'm marking out the main armor piece so I can apply the glue. And that is already glued on there, good to go, ready for the emblem now. You can see the curve that it will forever maintain. And for the emblem, I like to set it on there and use super glue for it. And I start with the center, and then I do each wing separately, just so that way it is much easier easier to glue down and maintain in its proper position. And that is the chest piece all done. And now we'll move on to the back piece. And for the back, it is essentially the exact same as the front, just a different design. Trace out your base with 5mm EVA foam, and then the upper two armor pieces with the 10mm foam. You cut out your pieces, then off to the side, and then you cut out your pattern to mark out where your pieces are going to go, and transfer to the 10mm foam as well. I also used floor mat foam for the upper two back pieces to carry over the same consistent texture as I did on the front. And I did the inward angle cut and flip it over for an outward bevel on those, and of course heat your back piece and all those armor pieces. For that lower piece, I used a 5mm EVA foam piece. And there you can see it has that same curvature in those bevels. And for the shoulder, you've got your middle two sides and the lower shoulder pad. So I like to heat it up and form it. These two edges here are actually going to be cut in an inward angle cut to allow it to have a nice sharp edge on the shoulder pads. You'll kind of heat those and curve it into shape, a nice rounded curved edge. And here you'll apply glue on the edges and then line up with your hash marks. I like to start with the bottom and then work my way up, just applying glue, or apply the glue, let it dry, then line up the hash marks nice and slow. Make sure your edges are nice and together. And then you will line up the bottom bicep piece to make sure the edge is held together. Then apply the same glue, curve it together, and push it into place. And you'll do that 2 times, 1 for each shoulder. And here we're going to start on the optional ab pieces. There's a top and a bottom here. I'm going to trace them out and mark out the glue lines and cut all the edges with a straight cut. There are also some undercuts on these pieces as well that are optional. Here I'm kind of layering them up, see how it's going to look. And here I'm marking out the undercuts. It's a V-groove undercut, and I'm marking as such on there so I can keep everything straight. Once in my blade, I'm going to just cut a V-groove on the back side of the foam, and then it folds over on itself and it creates that nice hill on the other side. And if you notice on the top piece, on the smaller piece, I didn't go all the way to the top. That's just so it's still has a flatter piece for the ab to glue, or for the chest to glue to. And of course, as always heat form your foam before gluing it, just so you can get a better adhesion. And I'm also sizing it up how it's going to look here. And I'm going to line up those glue lines to make sure that it lines up evenly and overlap the front just slightly. And I'm just going to use some super glue to do that, which I started on the front and then worked my way to the side. And then I cut out some 2mm foam squares to glue on the inside to kind of strengthen up along that seam there on the inside. And this is how it looks once it is all glued together. Just use some super glue. Alright, here I'm going to go over the gauntlets real quick. As you can tell, I've already got them built. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to record me actually building these, so I'll just go over them real quick. It's all 5mm foam. You can also use 6mm. But the main gauntlet piece is half of it like usual, and you'll take and flip it on this edge right here. So it's all one piece. And then you have this smaller piece that goes over the top, which actually I used 3mm foam for that. And then you just line it up in the middle, contact cement, glue it down. For the fins, they are 5mm foam. And I had cut I'd cut the edges out at an outward angle, so it kind of gives it a blade type appearance. And then the other side's just flat. So when you wear it, you'll have this side out for the blade, if that makes sense. And then for this side, I used some 2mm foam, and I glued it over this seam and then wrapped it over the edge. That just helps hide the seam for one, and for two, it helps keep it together. So that way you less likely seam splitting. And then if you'll notice here at the wrist, there's no like closure really. It just stays closed and it's open. But I used some 2mm foam here on the inside and glued it to one side. I made it so that way that gap is just filled by that 2mm foam. So that way there's no need for the Velcro closure or anything like that. And they just slip on. As you can tell, slip it on, has an opening, and it closes back up like that. And that's it for the gauntlets. Just push them off like that. And of course, 2 of them. And whenever you're cutting out your fins, make sure that you change your angle cuts for the other side, so that way it's consistent. So you mirror one side to the other. And as you can tell, I've got everything else painted. I still need to paint the emblem on this, which for the Grim Knight, the emblem is actually like an off-white or silver. And I'm also gonna do some weathering on this as well. And you'll also notice I've got a lot of texture on these armor pieces as well. I used Flex Seal for that, or the off-brand version of it. It's slightly cheaper for a little bit more. It's a lot thicker and it has a much more porous or texturized finish than what regular Flex Seal does. Either one will work. I just did this because I can coat it in one coat versus 3 to 4 with Plasti Dip. And of course I don't coat the back of it. But then after that, of course, I'm gonna be going over strapping this, and we'll do that. And the same thing to the shoulder pads as well. All right, guys, that does it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. The templates will be available in my Etsy shop, link down below. I will also kind of go over real quickly the straps. I just used 1.25 inch or 1.5 inch nylon straps for the shoulders, and then also to a little loop here to keep the shoulders attached. And then some Velcro on this, and it just goes through and Velcros to itself. Just like that. Like that on both sides. And of course the elastic on the shoulders, or around the bicep, that is. But yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks again for watching, and always remember, there are no mistakes in cosplay, only battle damage. You guys have a great one.